Prime Minister, good morning to you.
Good morning, how are you?
Very well, thank you. You made those 5 pledges. We ran through those a moment ago back in January. How do you think your pledge on the NHS is standing up?
You know, it's tricky because of the industrial action, but let's just recap what the 5 are: to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the boats. And we should happily talk about all of them. Look, when it comes to the NHS, we put record funding in. That's the first thing I did quite quickly after becoming Prime Minister. And we're making good progress on putting more beds in, more ambulances in, getting people discharged out of hospitals quicker, first ever long-term workforce plans, so we hire enough doctors and nurses for the future. Look, so those are all the good things that are happening. And as I said, I come from an NHS family, I care deeply about it. But unfortunately, because of the strikes, it's been hard to make progress.
So it's all about the strikes then. Can I just momentarily interrupt, Prime Minister, and share with you a story that we had on the show and somebody I met last week, Roger Hollingsworth. He's 77. He lives near Truro. Take a listen to what happened to him 3 weeks ago with the NHS.
Prime Minister, I had a suspected heart attack. I waited 1 hour 40 minutes for an emergency vehicle. Another 2 hours outside the hospital in 2 different ambulances. A further 20 hours in an ambulance holding room, seated on a broken reclining chair that did not recline. Then I was moved to a bed blocking an emergency exit in a ward. I was moved again to a second ward with another bed blocking an emergency exit. So, Prime Minister, when are you going to admit Treliske Hospital cannot cope with the demand it faces? And what action are you going to take to correct it?
How does that stack up against your pledge of getting the NHS care people need more quickly?
So look, I'm sorry to hear about Roger's experience, and it's obviously hard for me to know the specifics of it. So, and I hope people forgive me for talking a little bit more in generalities. He's absolutely right to focus on ambulance waiting times and A&E performance. Again, nationally, what I can tell you is, since I became Prime Minister, you remember last Christmas performance was nowhere near good enough, but we have taken ambulance times down from about an hour and a half to around half an hour for Category 2. A&E performance has gone up from about 64% to around 75%, there or thereabouts, so it is improving. And then obviously that doesn't help Roger in his situation, but I want people to know that in aggregate, across the country, the plans that we've put in place are making a difference.
But just not yet, are they?
Yeah, but, again, everyone will have a different story. Obviously, Roger's story is not acceptable, and I'm not going to try and defend that, of course not. But as I say, across the country, because we've put record investment in more ambulances, more beds, getting people discharged quicker, that is making a difference. But look, I know people are frustrated, right? I'm frustrated because having put this record funding in, worked really hard on it, it is frustrating that the strikes are holding back progress.
So it's not down to the strikes, is it, Prime Minister? It's not the fact that the funding isn't filtering through and making a difference on the front line.
So look, the funding is at record levels, right? Now look, we always like to be able to spend more on things? Of course we would, but obviously I've got to balance that across everything else. But I can tell you that there is record funding going into health and social care. Those are just the facts. I did it weeks after becoming Prime Minister, and on the strikes, and just to put it in sense of scale about what's happened, right? Because then people can make up their own mind. 1 million appointments have now been cancelled or rescheduled because of the industrial action. 1 million appointments across the country. People can get a sense of how much impact that's having. And look, people will say, well, why don't you just get round the table and talk?
Well, yeah, a good point. Why not?
Yeah, so look, we have a process for pay, and we do exactly that. So we have reached an agreement with over 1 million NHS workers.
But whilst you dig your heels in on your perspective, you are getting more and more delayed appointments.
So Again, let's just go through the facts. So over 1 million NHS workers, including those paid far less than doctors, have settled. 1 million more, including nurses and porters. Now they've all settled. Now we have an independent body, because look, pay stuff is always tricky. That's why we have an independent body, not the government, who takes evidence from everybody, gets around the table, and then they say, look, here's our best recommendation. And you know what? That recommendation was for the doctors, the junior doctors, to get around a 9% pay increase. For a typical junior doctor, 9%, more than everyone else in the NHS, more than anyone else in the public sector. The government accepted that in full. So
Let's
the government
talk.
Said, even,
you said that, okay, Prime Minister. You've clarified that point there. Can I because our time is limited.
People will make up their own mind.
Our time is limited, understandably. Let's talk about the issues very pertinent to Cornwall. On the issue of housing, extreme development as well, and it kind of relates to the NHS, the pressure that is being put on our health services, more and more houses, less and less infrastructure investment as well. Why is that the case? Why aren't you sorting out the whole thing, changing society as a whole, if you're wanting more houses to be built to deal with the fact that people can't get a home of their own here at an affordable price?
Yeah, look, so particularly in rural areas, this has become a challenge, particularly in places like Cornwall, where there are lots of second homeowners and visitors. So what we are doing is giving councils far more power to manage that. And it's a tricky balance. I live in a very rural area in North Yorkshire, and it's great to live in a place that people want to come and visit. That's great for our local economy, but we've got to balance that with the needs of local communities. And that's why local councils are being given by this government more power to think about how they prioritise housing for local people. And look, I do want to get on and build more homes for the next generation in a sensible way. We just tried to do that, pass a new law in Parliament to get rid of these defective EU laws that we'd inherited that were stopping the construction of 100,000 homes across the country, including in the southwest, and Labour blocked them. They blocked those plans. We could have unlocked 100,000 homes.
What about the extra
we could have
infrastructure?
improved our environment.
We've got problems with GPs who are overrun. We've got the hospital, which sometimes has as many as 7 wards of patients unable to get out because there's no social care. It's a crisis.
Look, that goes back to our conversation before, and I just say we're investing record sums in the NHS, record sums in our schools. That infrastructure needs to be built alongside new housing. Of course it does, and that's why the developers have to make a contribution. We're in the process of reforming that to make it work even better for local areas. But look, that is happening. Would people like more money going into all these things? Of course they would. But I think people also probably would prefer their taxes to come down as well over time, and we don't want to borrow any more money because that's just going to make inflation worse.
Prime Minister,
right? And that's going to not help people with the cost of living.
We must leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. As brief as it was, but good to hear from you this morning. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister. I tried my best. Lots to try and get in there, but what are your thoughts this morning on that?